We'll ask everyone to please be seated at this time. We're about to begin the services for Mr. Rubin, Bob, Weiner. Just as a gentle reminder, if you have a cell phone with you, for those of you present here at the chapel, please place it in the silent mode or turn it off completely. That would be appreciated. We also want to welcome all of you that have logged in online. The services this afternoon will be conducted by Rabbi Taryn Tackman from Beth Tikvah congregation in Hoffman Estates. However, we will be beginning the service this afternoon with military honors from United States Army.
behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation. Please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. God bless you.
Thank you.
Condolences to you
Thank
in
you.
this time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We are gathered here today because Rubin, Bob Weiner, made a difference in your life. Bob, the beloved husband of Sonny, loving father of Dr. Larry and Joyce, Gary and Mina, and Dr. Joel and Dr. Ann, proud grandfather of Seth and Erin, Shayna and Kevin, Mira and Dr. Eli, Ari and Alexa, cherished great-grandfather of Sonia, Sadie, Ezra, and Arlo, dear brother of the late Ralph. Sadie? And Bob cherished his family and lived life to the fullest. He's a friend to many. As we think of Bob's life, we think of life itself. Ultimately, we think of God. In Jewish tradition, there is a blessing for everything. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, dayan ha'emet. Blessed is God, judge of truth. I've set the eternal always before me. God is at my side. For you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful one see destruction. You show me the path of peace. Your presence brings fullness and joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. God, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. As for us, you turn us to repentance and say, return, you mortals. The days of our years are 70, or by reason of strength 80 years. But as 1,000 years in God's sight, these days are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. Teach us therefore to number our days, that we may attain a heart of wisdom. And may your favor, O God, be upon us. Establish the work of our hands, that it may long endure. Death has taken your beloved Bob. You grieve in your darkened world. In your silence there is lamentation. In your tears there is loneliness. Lost in your sorrow, may you find the presence of God, of loving friends and loving family. Hear them, O God. Be with them. Hamakom yenachen etchem. For Bob's love that united you in life and which death cannot sever. For his companionship you shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of his heart and mind that brought you joy and happiness and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. Adonai roi lo echsar. I invite you to please recite together with me the 23rd Psalm, which can be found in the handout. We read together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. A few years ago, Bob Weiner shared with me a few of the beautiful poems he had written. One such poem begins with a series of questions regarding the manner in which people live their lives. His poem opens with questions and concludes with Bob's personal wisdom for a life best lived. Bob's words read, "Do you sit only in the cave of your mind, feeling safe and secure away from life's grind? Do you ever think that life may be passing you by? Or do you just dream of far-off visits in your mind's eye? So gird up your loins and venture into life's battle. You will find horizons aglow, and your blues will skedaddle." Recently, when I visited with Bob, I couldn't help but remember his meaningful poem that he shared with me. Bob related to me the challenges he faced with lymphoma and the chemo treatments he had endured. He spoke with gratitude about the treatments he received, and he was appreciative of the many people who had been helpful and kind to him. At 93 years old, just shy of 94 years, one can imagine how Bob or anyone would find comfort remembering the past and dreaming of far-off visits. Such inner thoughts indeed help us feel safe and secure from life's grind. This is especially true when a person, as could Bob, could confidently look back at a long life where he did venture into life's battle, where he did find horizons aglow, and where he was able to send away the blues. For Bob Weiner, life didn't just pass him by. He lived life fully. Bob made the most of the time he was given. Bob Weiner was a past president of Beth Tikvah congregation, the congregation I serve. I remember asking him about it. Bob spoke about his and Sonny's delight at finding a Jewish community, which was such a good fit with such a wonderful group of people. In the role of president and in other roles before that, Bob oversaw the financial well-being of the temple. He supervised a major heating system and kitchen renovation. He helped select a new rabbi, and he quite possibly helped paint the roof white. We're not entirely sure. He also fixed a lot of things. At Beth Tikvah congregation, Bob served many roles during his long-time membership. Bob even sometimes led Shabbat services when Rabbi Emeritus Hillel Gamaron was out of town. Also at one time, Bob and Sonny lived very close to Beth Tikvah congregation, and Bob was known as the guy with the extra key to the temple, if ever needed. Certainly for Bob and Sonny, not only did their leadership open up many doors to many in the Jewish community, so too did their involvement as members bring forth fond memories, such as celebrating the B'nai Mitzvah and weddings of their 3 sons and their grandsons, Brit, and Sonny's adult bat mitzvah. It was also at Beth Tikvah that Bob and Sonny met some of their most close and longtime friends. Bob was a natural and wonderful leader. He was intelligent and motivated. Bob liked to see things done right. He cared about people, and he served with their best interest at heart. In his life, Bob took on many leadership roles beyond Beth Tikvah. He, for example, at one time was president of his condo board in Northbrook, and Bob also took an active role at Chestnut Square, his place of residence. Bob was someone who was interested and interesting. He was intellectually curious, a lifelong learner, and he knew so much about everything. Bob was well-read. He would devour a newspaper from cover to cover. He wrote poetry. He was an excellent bridge player. He spoke and read Yiddish. Bob loved music and was interested in outer space. Bob was also known for the jokes that he told, which were funny, but probably couldn't be repeated by a rabbi on the high holy days. There was so much to him. He knew a lot about cars. He was a collector of items and a fixer of things. He could paint, do plumbing and electric work. Bob was also a world traveler and was an excellent camper and canoeer. In his profession as a chemist and salesman, Bob was talented and successful, and he appreciated how his work enabled him to travel the world and support his family. With so many experiences and interests to talk about, Bob was a great conversationalist and an engaging storyteller. As family members related to me, Bob would often preface his stories by saying, "I have something interesting to tell you." More often than not, what he told you was interesting and thoughtful. Bob was someone who was friendly and social and enjoyed people. Over the span of his life, Bob and Sonny made many friends everywhere they went, including most recently at Chestnut Square. This was a place where Bob and Sonny enjoyed living and where they befriended many people while participating in classes, activities, and meals. When I met with Bob a few months ago, he spoke of his love and his pride for his family. Family, all of you meant the world to him. Bob told me about how he first met Sonny after the war many years ago, and you met on a blind date, he told me. A friend gave Bob Sonny's phone number. He called, and Bob was enchanted. When he met Sonny, he described, he always remembers how bright and beautiful you are, and he describes you as a nice Jewish girl. He told me that the two of you had an Orthodox Jewish wedding at your parents' house. And though Bob couldn't understand much of what the rabbi was saying in Hebrew, he happily agreed to it all. Sonny, you and Bob were married for nearly 72 years come February. Though you were different people and you didn't always agree on everything, no couple ever does, between you there was mutual respect and appreciation. There was so much you had in common and that you enjoyed together, such as your love for music, the joy of traveling, the thrill of dancing together, which you both did marvelously, and the blessing of raising children together. As you told me, you had a wonderful life together. Most of all, you complemented and strengthened each other. There was so much love. As you told me, a common refrain between you both would be that Bob would say to you, "I love you," and you would reply, "I love you more." When I met with Bob, what he told me was that he had the best wife, the best partner, the best mother to his children he could possibly have. He said, over the years, he would have had a hard time were it not for Sonny's for her positive love, her support and encouragement. Looking back at his life, Bob considered himself to be extremely fortunate. He said to me, "What a life I have had. I did it with my wife. I wouldn't want it any other way." I know you feel the same about him. Bob spoke with pride to everyone he met. Whenever he spoke of his 3 sons, Larry, Gary, and Joel, each son in a few moments will share personal reflections, as will be representatives as grandchildren of Bob's. Bob loved being a father and a father-in-law and a grandfather and a great-grandfather. More will be shared about these roles. Bob was so proud of his sons and their many accomplishments, and he loved Joyce, Mina, and Ann. Sonny said what was important and most important to both her and Bob is that they raised sons who are kind. And Larry, Gary, and Joel are exactly that. As Sonny, you said, and as we all know, as you said, your sons are the nicest people in the world. As a father, Bob impressed upon you 3, through his example, the importance of being honest. He taught you to be curious and interested, to value education, to appreciate art and music and nature, and to be a collector of stuff. Bob loved, in addition, being a grandfather and a great-grandfather, and Seth and Erin and Shayna and Kevin and Eli and Ari and Alexa and Sonia and Sadie and Ezra and Arlo. You all meant the world to him. With each of you, your grandfather, your great-grandfather, was expressive and loving. He enjoyed watching you grow up. He was interested in your lives. He enjoyed seeing you find what you're interested in doing, and he was always interested in everything going on in your lives. He was so proud of each of you. What a blessing to have had such a wonderful grandfather, a great grandfather. What Bob would have wanted for all of you would be for you all to be happy and healthy and successful and kind. He would want the family to stay close and for you to look after Sonny. Judaism teaches that the best way to honor the memory of our departed loved ones is by living as they themselves lived at their best. As we remember Bob Weiner, let us strive, as did he, to live lives of love, lives of family and friends, laughter and joy, service to others, curiosity and interest, and maybe even some poetry. In doing so, as Bob beautifully envisioned, may we all find horizons aglow, and may our blues skedaddle. Zichrono livracha, may Bob Weiner's memory always be a blessing. Amen. I'd like to invite forward at this time Joel and Ann to share a few words.
Hi, I'm Joel. I'm the youngest son. This is Ann, my wife. My father had an abiding interest in science and worked as a chemist for about 25 years. This love of science was imparted to me. I became a scientist and worked as a biochemist for about 10 years, and then I became a high school chemistry teacher. Our unfortunate twin attributes of competitiveness, sometimes I assume I inherited from him, seemed to prevent meaningful interaction until a few years after I started teaching, when we eased into conversations about science. These became more frequent and enjoyable over the past 15 years. We had finally found common ground. In my visits to him at his many hospitalizations over the years, I always hoped no one else would be there so that we could settle into a good discussion of whatever was going on in the world of science. We both found these conversations to be greatly satisfying and obviously forging and strengthening our connection as father and son. I am deeply grateful to my father for his love of music. He had hundreds of records of classical and jazz and would play them all the time as I was growing up. At an early age, I began to play those same records on his stereo and sink into the couch and drift away with the sound, as I so often saw my father do. I am deeply thankful for this outlet that he imparted to me. Finally, I will mention that he loved to write poetry, which, as we know, in our last visit with him last Saturday with my wife Ann and daughter Alexa, this was 2 days before his death, which he knew was imminent. His cognitive functioning was still very much intact. We communicated through writing, and he laughed and smiled and wrote with levity. And in a final spontaneous burst of creativity, he wrote a poem to us at that last visit. I will leave you now with the words of his final poem. I've bid you come to bid you adieu, as I really love all of you. I bid you all with a smile, with a cheer, sans any guile. Love, Dad.
I'm Ann, Bob's daughter-in-law, and I just want to speak really briefly about what a wonderful father-in-law he was, and that he always embraced me as an unconventional daughter-in-law, and who, when he first met me, all I wanted to do was become a philosopher, and I had no domestic skills and no interest in it, and still don't very much. And Bob never pushed me. He always was so supportive of that. And throughout the years when Joel and I were in grad school, he was so supportive, and that culminated when he came to my PhD graduation ceremony, and they handed out stadium cushions that said Loyola University of Chicago. And I didn't think much of it, but for years and years and years after that, whenever Bob came to our daughter's violin recitals and circus performances and skating performances, there was the cushion. And I never got around to hanging up my diploma, but every time I saw that cushion, I thought about Bob's support, and I felt very grateful that he helped me achieve my dreams. And every time I saw the cushion, I thought about that. And and as Bob got older, and I think his sons can know this very much, and his grandchildren, I don't think even saw the change, but he got more and more expressive and loving. And to me, that love and the blossoming of his own ability to love came out in the beautiful photos he took of flowers. And those photos decorate our house and they decorate our daughter's room at college. I'm sure many of you have those photos as well. And I always think about them and Bob's ability to blossom in love and emotion as he aged. And I think he was able to show that very much with his relationship with his grandchildren, with all of us. And finally, I want to say, when we went to that last visit, Joel, Alexa, and I, Bob was sitting on the cushion from my graduation. And 26 years after I got my doctorate, Bob was sitting on that cushion when he died. So that was pretty extraordinary. So, and he died surrounded by 3 generations of his loved ones and sitting on a cushion from my graduation. And so to the day he died, I always felt that he was supporting my goal, and I hope that we could give him some measure of comfort.
Gary and Ari.
Okay. So Dad did turn out to be kind of a Renaissance man, and as a scientist, he was quite the opposite of me as an artist. And it took us quite a number of years to find a common ground. And I'm going to just go through some early memories. And at first it's going to seem that we're a little bit disparate, but then we figured it all out. I always realized that Dad had my back. And being sort of the middle son, a bit of a radical, he had a tough time with me, I think, sometimes. One time, I was 16 years old and driving around with some friends after curfew, and we ended up at the police station. And after a couple hours of not really knowing what was going on, a 12-foot police officer came up to me. Maybe he was 14 feet high. He was big. And says, I think you better call your father and tell him to pick you up. You're not a bad guy. And so Dad came at about 2:30 or 3 in the morning. And I just wondered what he was going to do. And we get in the car and we're driving home. And I thought, this guy is so angry with me. He can't even speak. He really didn't say a word the whole way home. And I thought, tomorrow he's going to really lay into me. I don't know what's going to happen. Anyway, tomorrow rolls around, and breakfast the next day. He didn't say a word. I said, okay. He's a strong, silent type. And anyway, it sort of became a pattern of him not really knowing what to say to me at times. But he was strong. He always had my back, and I realized that, which was important. There were, when you're that age and you're in an important transition, I think there are things that parents can say. He chose not to. He chose to say it through actions. And I can appreciate that. I moved to Toronto, and about 25 years later, after having Ari and Mira and a wonderful life, met Mina, and Mina and I were invited by Mom and Dad to spend a winter in Florida with them. And they had rented a house, and Mina and I went down. And Mom and Dad's friends couldn't believe that we had gotten along so well. Enough to the point that Mom and Dad and Mina and I bought a house together and spent another 6 or 7 winters together, 3 or 4 months at a time. And we had an absolute wonderful time with family and friends visiting, and we celebrated many simchas in the winters in Florida. And we always celebrated Mom and Dad's anniversaries and birthdays. And it was just very memorable. And it was at that time in Florida that I got to actually know my father for the very first time in my life. We were in our 50s, and we did find a common ground. He was a wonderful guy, and all of a sudden he opened up. He started telling me stories and jokes, and he became a human being to me. And although we didn't really discuss art, he was an art lover, and we did discuss science and music, mostly jazz. We sort of came together as both lovers of jazz. And I do have another story about listening, about both enjoying an artist named Freddie Hubbard, a trumpet player. And I wasn't going to tell this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's kind of funny. It it illustrates who Dad was. So we were listening to Freddie Hubbard. We both loved Freddie Hubbard, a trumpet player. And Dad said, I got Freddie's autograph one time at a jazz club. I guess in Toronto, it was Mr. Kelly's or the Jazz Showcase, some great jazz club. And, Dad was the kind of guy, he was the guy who would be in line, waiting in line with an album in hand and sitting there at the club with an album at the table, waiting for the gig to end and talking to the musician afterwards and getting a signature on the album. So he told me that he went backstage and met Freddie, and Freddie said, "Hey man, you want to share a joint?" And this is my dad's story. And I said, "So, did you smoke it?" And he just started laughing. So you can make up your own answer at this point. So he's quite a guy. But I think the whole idea that I have here is that I realized that he had my back in silence. He was a strong, silent father. And we grew to really, really get along and become friends and love each other. And Mom was always there with us. And I appreciate both Mom and Dad. And Dad, I really miss you. And I love you very much.
He told me the same story, and he gave me the answer. I guess that's for me to know. There's a photo I have in my apartment that Grandpa took. It's a photo of a single leaf. But it's this beautiful photo set on a deep black background, and the jagged edges of the leaf somehow fade into and slice through simultaneously. Thousands of minuscule water droplets cover the leaf, reflecting light from whatever the source, either direct or maybe glinting off Grandpa's camera lens. But the photo looks like a photo of space with a remarkable star cluster formed. And that's what I thought it was when I first saw it until he told me the truth. And space was a place that Grandpa read and dreamed about and talked about often. I have the photo hanging in a floating frame, hanging on my wall, where it's been since August when he gave it to me. This week, the photo still in the frame fell down. I've never been one who confidently believes in messages or contact with people who have moved on previously in my life, but this particular moment was very difficult for me to ignore. When I got into photography, he was so excited. He was always excited when any of us took on a new challenge and decided to learn something new. He was quick to begin teaching me about aperture and light and depth and what lenses he liked, of which he gifted me with several, and it became a great way for us to bond. I have a quick story from a few weeks ago. it was the only time I've ever heard Grandpop seem a little disappointed. I had bought a bunch of jazz records. It's a genre I don't know a lot about because my appreciation for it is recent. I was on the phone with Grandpop, and as always, he asked if there was anything new that I was interested in these days. And I said, I just got all these jazz records. And he said, great. Who do you like? I told him I wasn't ready for a conversation about it. There were a few guys I really liked, but I couldn't remember all their names at the time. But what I was really getting fascinated by was the drummers. I loved the drummers. He said, great. I said, oh, and Charlie Parker. And there was a long silence. And I heard on the other end of the phone a really deep sigh. And Grandpop said, no, Charlie Parker doesn't play drums. Years ago, when I was pretty young, I made the ultimate mistake of telling Grandpop that I had just watched a documentary that I thought was interesting. I didn't say if I believed it or not. I just said it was interesting, but it was about the moon landing possibly being faked. It was over an hour later that he was maybe halfway through explaining to me in rigorous and vicious detail why this was absurd. I think that his love of space came only in small part from his engineering background and fascination with the mechanics of it all. To Grandpop, space represents the possibility of next, the idea that the unknown is beautiful, interesting, and necessary, that there is always more to learn about, there is always more to theorize about, and an infinite opportunity for discussion and debate. And Grandpop is now next. He was beautiful, interesting, and necessary. And I hope that now, to at least a few questions, he has a few more answers.
Thank you, Eric. That was really nice. Thanks.
Larry and Seth.
So I had the honor of being Bob's grandson, and with that came a host of life lessons about family and work ethic and loving, but most of them included some sort of cutout from the Chicago Tribune in the form of an article. And they, besides those, had something to do with having good mileage on your car or a properly funded retirement account. But the most were important ones to me were about family and love and life, which was he was blessed with the longest and most beautiful one of anybody I know. And he also taught with me probably the most important lesson that just like space, knowledge is infinite, and that with that you can have a successful career and a wonderful family, and that anything is possible. He truly did live the American dream, son of immigrants, and having a successful career and a good education, and showing us, his family, how much we were all cared for. We will greatly love and miss him.
All right, it's a lot of papers, but they're double-spaced. So a rabbi decides that he wants to try pork, but he's not quite sure how to do it. So he goes to a restaurant on the edge of town and orders a pork dish, and like they serve, sometimes you see pork dishes, it's the pig's head with an apple in it. And he's about to eat it when a congregant walks in, and of course he sees the congregant in horror. And the congregant comes over and says, Rabbi, what's going on? He says, can you believe I ordered an apple and that's how they serve it? So here's what a good life looks like. And that was one of my dad's jokes. And that's the only one I'm telling. But we're going to quickly pick up the story as underage. Bob Weiner enlisted in the Army. He was sent to Alaska, where he was a radar operator and helped land planes on an Army airstrip. He was initially very modest about his service, but later in life grew on to be very proud about it and went on an honor guard trip to Washington, D.C., which he was quite thrilled about. One of his favorite stories, however, is when he was very sound asleep one night on the base and his, quote, friends decided to play a prank on him. He was, shall we say, sleeping in the buff. He was a very sound sleeper. They tied his blanket down to the bed and took it outside without waking him. And so he awoke under these covers in an Alaskan winter outside. So that was a good example of kind of the stories and anecdotes he loved to tell about in his life. And as alluded to, he doubled with jokes that were, as his term, ribald in nature. And most of his jokes resulted in eye rolling without a lot of laughter, but it was always fun to see what he was going to say next. As the rabbi said, my mom and he were fixed up by a friend. They hit it off, started their life together, as my mom says, without 2 pennies to rub together. Friends were an amazing, integral part of their lives, something they stretched very far and wide. They started young with a group that actually formed a club. They rented their own place. They had meetings. They had parties. And these people kept in contact for their entire lives. Toward the end of my dad's life, there were 3 guys left. Eddie Itzenson just recently died. And a few days before my dad died, I said, Dad, you know, it's you and Frank Katz, and I think Frank's going to come in first, and you're going to come in second. And he actually thought that was funny. And did I mention that my dad wrote letters? And I'm talking about huge numbers of letters. They all started with love letters to my mom when they were courting. There's a giant box of them. And as the years went by, he wrote letters to CEOs with complaints. He wrote letters to authors, astronauts, politicians, scientists, artists, musicians. But his favorite he always liked to show was a letter he wrote to a restaurant chef in Chicago, who then wrote him back swearing at him. So my dad was always proud showing this letter that he got from the chef. But his letters always had something important to say or ask, and he almost always got a reply. Now, once he did have trouble getting a response from a CEO, so he did something that I'm sure all of us would do. He wrote a poem of complaint to the CEO, and that actually elicited a response. He was brilliant in his depth of knowledge, as you heard, and you got that by speaking to him, because the whole world would open up when he would speak to you. He could talk on almost any subject and absolutely loved having in-depth conversations. He really paid attention. He wanted to hear what you had to say, and he wanted to learn from it. And I think that's one reason why lots of us are here. I mean, he paid attention to people. Curious as an adjective does not begin to describe his thirst for knowledge. He was always reading books and articles. As Seth said, if he thought someone needed an article that he saw, he cut it out, he copied it, he mailed it to you, he gave it to you, but he expected you to get something out of it, read it, and even discuss it with him. He was a frustrated astronaut. I think that's what he really wanted to do in life. His collection of airplane and space paraphernalia is crazy extensive. Books, stamps, articles, newspapers, photos, and artwork in the hundreds. He loved getting autographs from people, as they said. He brought his albums, he got them signed. He loved getting all his books signed, and if he couldn't meet an author, he would write them about the book and ask for a signature, and almost always he got a signature back that he could put in the book for it to be autographed. If you want to come to my basement, there are thousands of slides from all his photography. He had a great eye for composition, and I love the idea that my dad's flower pictures are spread around many people, including lots of his physicians that he gave them to. As Gary said, my dad taught, I think, by example and not so much by word. The way he treated people, the way he did something, what he gave to you to read, what he valued. And he was strict and harsh, I think, in his early life, but something I always admired that he was able to soften and mellow. And a whole new side of him did open up with appreciation, tolerance, and love that really finally balanced his intellectual drive. Now, sometimes he was a little cheap, most notably when we would go over for dinner, and he was very excited to bring out his latest good deal, which would be a $6 bottle of wine. So needless to say, we kind of took over the wine part of that soon thereafter. I do believe his motto in life was gadgets. If you could have one of something, then you could surely have 10. Every light switch in all their houses eventually was a dimmer. If you wanted tools, wires, screws, cameras, batteries, there was a virtual store. But he knew how to use all of it. And he did his carpentry, plumbing, electrical, car repairs that we've all, I think, benefited from and learned from. He, Joel Meyer, and Mickey Bubley were the repairmen at their synagogue, Beth Tikvah, when funds were low in the early times. So what else was he good at? The list is pretty extensive, but includes camping and enjoying nature, which is where both me and Gary and Joel have learned our love of the Boundary Waters. Tennis, racquetball, building models with balsa wood and plastic ones. He assembled Heathkit stereos in the old days when you actually did things like that. He and my mom were truly world travelers. They literally went around the world. Great dancing. He had amazing Passover seders and lots of other stuff. He was not, however, the best at fashion. I wanted all of us to wear one of his ties, because if you saw just one of us with it, you'd say, holy cow, what are they doing today? But it turns out he got rid of most of his ties, so I was very disappointed that we did not have an extensive set of examples of them. But sometimes he would come in with a kind of what were you thinking moment with what he was wearing. And I know that some of you think I may have inherited that gene at times. So what he really loved most of all, though, was his wife of 72 years, my mom, his family, immediate and far, and actually all of you, truly all of you. Having his 5 grandchildren was the best thing that happened for him. I think it allowed him to really grow. He adored each one of you, for sure. I know he was very proud of you, and you also helped open his eyes to a new world that he took on with relish. The bonus came with your well-chosen spouses, whom he welcomed with absolutely love and just as intense feeling. Before I finish, I want to thank Joyce for her tireless devotion to my dad. You are the one who took him to everything. And it's just amazing what you did for him. So, thank you. He did battle with this cancer in a positive and courageous way. There was nary a peep of complaining out of him, except for the one time when he was just not able to understand why the radiation techs did not know the properties of the plastic they were using to make his mold so he could get his therapy. He just could not get that. When his body, but not his mind, finally called it quits, he did concede that his time was up. His last day, though, was a classic Bob Weiner. It was organized and task-oriented. By then, he really was unable to speak, but could still hear, see, and write. He demanded to know the exact date. So he was told the date was January 24th, so he wrote down January 24th, 2022, in his not-so-good handwriting at that point. And under that date, he wrote not "I'm dying," but he said "I'm expiring," and he signed his name. True to his word, he did just that peacefully and quietly at 5:20 p.m. that night, surrounded by the family he so loved. So, hats off to you, Dad, for such a wonderful and complete life. That's really what great looks like.
God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life, the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way. But you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. O God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is the dwelling place of your love and glory. I'd like to invite you to please rise as you are able as we recite the words of El Malei Rachamim. Amalei Rachamim Shochen Bamromim Hamse Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina Im Kedoshim Utorim Kizor Harekia Mazhirim Et Nishmat Rubin Ben Svi Shahalach Leolamo Baal Harachamim Yistareha Beseter Kanfav Leolamim V'yitzor bitzor hachayim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato v'anuach v'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Bob Weiner, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Please be seated for a few brief announcements. The interment will take place at Shalom Memorial Park in Arlington Heights. For those of you driving to the cemetery with us, we will make sure that you receive an orange funeral safety sticker to be placed in the inside front portion of your windshield, as well as a magnetic flag on top of your vehicle. And please use your bright headlights and your emergency flasher lights while in procession. And due to the pandemic, there will be no formal Shiva. At a later date, there will be an outdoor celebration of Mr. Weiner's life. The grandchildren present will be serving as pallbearers: Seth and Erin Weiner, Shayna and Kevin Weiner, Ari Lyon, and Alexa Dolinko, and as honorary pallbearers, Mira and Dr. Eli Lyonblum. I'll ask everyone to please step forward, the pallbearers to please step forward, and everyone else please rise at this time. Pallbearers over this way, please. Friends, if you're going to the cemetery, please go directly to your cars. Thank you. Let me get the children.